Welcome to the program. It's The Extra here on KRDO News Radio. It's 9:08 Friday morning. Thrilled to have you along today. I'm Paul Richards, your host, and we're thrilled to have in studio with us for a return visit. She is Catherine Hammond of the Hammond Law Group. Catherine, great to see you. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I am fabulous. Glad to be here.
Good. So I understand you've been on the road for a while, trying to get back in the groove. I feel your pain.
Yes, it's a rough life. Yeah.
You have to do it, don't you?
Exactly.
Well, it's good to have you back. We really appreciate you taking the time. So you've been doing this for a long time, trying to help people get their plans for their futures together. Has it been rewarding work, Catherine?
Oh, goodness. It has been more rewarding than I ever could have imagined when I first started. I first started thinking that I was just going to be helping people walk through the legal process.
Right.
And didn't really understand the impact that somebody like an estate planning attorney could have in the lives of families beyond that, beyond kind of holding their hand with the legal work. And really, it's the personal connections, the relationships, people coming to us for help, not just legal, but also emotional, holding their hands, that is what gets me out of bed every morning.
I imagine so. It's got to be very, very satisfying. And you've been doing it for, hard to believe when I look at you, 21 years now.
Yes, it's hard for me to believe. It has flown by. So
you've been dealing with families for a long, long time, and it's not just folks in their twilight years, but it's also folks who are, in their 40s, 30s, 50s. And all the way up, getting ready for their futures.
Absolutely, and it's interesting. All of us think that we only need to plan for death and disability when we get old, and death or disability might be close. But stuff happens.
Exactly.
And so really, our clients range from in their 20s and childless to, in their 80s.
Now let's talk about how you did this, how you got into this business. I understand there's a personal tragedy in your past that kind of spurred you to get into this line of work.
Yeah. I think with most things where we find our calling in life, it's, some things that have happened in our lives that weren't exactly what we would have chosen, that helps us down that path. And for me, it was my mother's story, and her journey with early onset Alzheimer's really started as clinical depression and then kind of moved into Alzheimer's. She thought it was moving in there by the time I was a young adolescent, and put her in a nursing home when I was 22, and with an official early onset Alzheimer's diagnosis. And I had a fabulous attorney who held my hand and walked me through that process. And so that was what inspired me to get my law degree and help other people.
Well, and if you don't mind my asking, how old was your mom when this happened?
So she was 56
Wow.
when she went to into the nursing home. She was late 40s when she thought she had it.
Wow, that's just incredible. My wife deals with Alzheimer's patients all the time, and to see the early onset folks, it's just tragic. It is just a horrific situation for the entire family.
Absolutely. Yeah. And none of us thinks it's going to happen to us or our
Right.
loved ones. It's a shock.
Exactly. And yeah, again, nobody thinks it's going to happen to us or our families. Mm-hmm. Catherine Hammond's our guest here on the program. We're going to take a short break. Welcome back to the show. It's The Extra here on KRDO News Radio. Friday morning, and we're thrilled to have in studio with us one of our favorite people. She is Catherine Hammond of the Hammond Law Group, that is. Catherine, once again, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it. Now, you didn't get into the business just to shuffle papers from one side of the desk to the other or create these complex legal documents, right? You were about helping people from the start, right?
Exactly. And in the estate planning world, the legal documents are just a small piece of what is actually helpful for people. And yes, we have to put stuff into legal documents because that's the way that the world works. But it's all about creating a comprehensive plan and then implementing the plan well and then maintaining it over time to make sure that things actually work the way that you want. The legal documents are just kind of the support pieces.
Sure. So. I want to talk about the documents, though, for just a second, because I'm curious as to just how specific they need to be and how specific they have to be. How specific do they get?
That's a great question, and it's a little bit different when you look at the financial piece of your estate plan,
right,
and then the healthcare piece of your estate plan. So as far as the financial side goes, you want to be rather specific, but not too specific.
So you want just a little flexibility in there.
Exactly, because we don't know what the world is going to look like in the future. So I have some people, for example, who say, I want to put in my will or trust that when I die, my house and my 2 rental properties have to be sold within 30 days and the money has to be invested into X kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
Right.
That's pretty specific.
It is specific.
And almost impossible to actually follow through on.
Exactly. And we don't know what the world is going to look like when you die. And so we don't know if that's actually what you would want. If the housing market has just crashed,
Sure.
if X kind of investment is now not a good investment, then you wouldn't want it to say that. So it's about communicating your intent versus too many details.
Okay, so it's kind of like the legislature. You have to go back and read the law and try to figure out what exactly was intended by those who wrote it.
Exactly.
That's got to be kind of tough, doesn't it?
It is tough. And it's also tough on the medical side. And April 16th is National Healthcare Decision Day. And so we are part of a movement of trying to get people to communicate your wishes regarding healthcare decisions if you can't communicate those anymore, and empower somebody to make decisions for you. And the big deal on the medical side is beyond just naming somebody who can make medical decisions for you. Everybody knows about Terry Schiavo.
Sure.
A few years back.
Down in Florida.
Exactly. Her husband wanted one thing. Her parents wanted a different thing. They both thought that they understood her wishes, but she had not empowered anybody to make the decision. And so it was in court for years. Lawyers made lots and lots and lots of money. I'm sure hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent on the legal bills because nobody was empowered to make the decisions. But the other part of that is communicating what we actually want. And so we can put that into a legal document. For example, a healthcare power of attorney or a 5 wishes document, which is a little bit more comprehensive, and say, if X situation happens, here's what I want you to do.
Here's going to be my power of attorney. Here's where I want my assets allocated, all that kind of thing.
Right, but also on the medical side of things, if I'm still living, but in let's say a vegetative state,
Okay.
Here's what I want you to do or not do. Here, do I want you to leave me on life support? Do I want you to let me go from life support? Do I want visitors? Do I want music? What kinds of visitors? What kinds of things do I want? And so historically, in our medical directives, people have only written the big things. Like, for example, the traditional Colorado living will says, if I have been in a coma or otherwise unconscious for at least 7 days, and there's no hope of my recovery, 2 doctors agree to that, and it's just artificial nutrition and hydration that are keeping me alive. Do I want to be kept alive beyond an initial 7 days, or do I want to be let go?
Right.
So that's helpful for somebody to know what your wish would be in that situation. But usually, it's not that exact situation.
Right. Something else has preceded it, and I'm going to get to that because the importance of things like a DNR, a do not resuscitate order, come into play as well, right?
Yes, and a DNR is a little bit separate. A DNR, and we can come back and talk about a DNR, because a DNR, most people only sign a DNR if they already have a condition where they know they would not want their life prolonged.
So perhaps they've had a heart attack, perhaps they've had a mini stroke, that kind of thing?
Yes, or perhaps they've had and still have leukemia or something else that they know, or perhaps they're, in their 80s and their health is failing anyway. I'm not a big proponent of signing a DNR if you're in your 50s.
Okay.
If I was in an accident and could be resuscitated and fine, then I would want to be resuscitated. But if I was in my late 80s and my health was failing, I wouldn't feel the same way. And a DNR, so there are several different healthcare directives that you can sign. A DNR is typically something that's done through a medical provider.
Okay.
So it's not a document that you get from a lawyer. It's done through your medical provider.
Okay. That's important to know as well.
Yeah.
And do doctors they don't have much problem signing these, do they? I mean, especially for someone who is in failing health.
So it's not the doctor who signs it, it's the patient.
Right.
So, yeah.
But the doctor has to sign off on it, right?
Well, the doctor's the one who then has to enforce it.
Implement it.
Exactly. And so, and yes, there is some hesitation by medical personnel about honoring a DNR when they're worried about legal liability. So that's the other thing, making sure that you do it all right so that when you get in front of the medical personnel who are trying to make the decision about whether to resuscitate or not resuscitate, they have confidence that they're not going to get sued if they don't resuscitate you.
Right. That's interesting. Fascinating stuff. Catherine Hammond's our guest here on the program. We're talking to her about estate planning. We're talking about all things that may and probably will come to pass. We've got a lot to go on the program, so hang tight for that. Coming up here on KRDO News Radio, at the top of the hour, we've got Tom Martino. He is the troubleshooter here on KRDO News Radio. And coming up on Monday's program, we've got a lot going on. We're going to talk to Jonathan Liebert. He is the CEO and president of the Southern Colorado Better Business Bureau. Of course, it is tax scam season. You heard Tom Baltasconis from Jackson Hewitt a little bit earlier this morning on KRDO's Morning News talking about how it is indeed scam season and everyone is ramping up trying to get their hands on your money. We're going to talk more about that coming up on Monday's program. We'll also have an update from our friends at the Colorado Springs Fire Department about how the wind conditions and dry conditions have led to some serious issues. We've seen lots of grass fires. We still have that one burning in the Pueblo area, about a half hour east of Pueblo, out near Avondale. So we'll get a check with our friends of the Colorado Springs Fire Department coming up on Monday's program as well. It's going to be a big week on KRDO News Radio next week. We hope you'll join us for that. And we'll also have some great prizes to give away, too. Of course, we'll have the news quiz right around 7 o'clock each morning where you'll get a chance for dinner for two with our friend Chef BB and the gang, Mama Pearl's Cajun Kitchen up at Rock Rimmon in Delmonico. So it's going to be a big week next week. We invite you to stay with us for the rest of the Extra coming up next. Welcome back to the program. It's The Extra here on KRDO News Radio, 937 on your Friday morning. Before we get back to more with Catherine Hammond of the Hammond Law Group, I want to congratulate Joshua Krameyer from the VA at the Colorado Springs Vet Center. He is our winner for the Old World Bagel and Coffee Contest today. Our friends from WeDeliverThings.com probably on their way over to the office even as we speak to drop off some fresh bagels and hot coffee from our friends at Old World Bagel. So congratulations to Josh, and thanks again to our friends at WeDeliverThings.com. They deliver anything, anytime, anywhere. Catherine Hammond's our guest here on the program of the Hammond Law Group. And Catherine, once again, thanks for the time. I really appreciate you making time for us here on the program because what we have to talk about is extremely important, especially for those of us who are, north of 50.
Right.
So let's talk about some of the, we were talking about DNRs and medical directives. What are some of the other sorts of directives medically that we need to know about?
So, DNRs, as I mentioned, are directives that you would do through your medical provider.
Right.
The documents that you want to do outside of your medical provider, either through an attorney or there are ways that you can get your hands on some of these without an attorney involved. A healthcare power of attorney that names somebody to make your medical decisions. Empowers them so that you don't end up in the court process like Terry Schiavo's family did, spending money, just figuring out who can make the decision. And then the living will or a similar type of document that expresses your wishes. But again, living will only says what your wishes are for one really unlikely situation.
Okay.
And so the important thing is expressing your wishes well beyond what that document will do. So I tell people, even there's another document called 5 Wishes that we use frequently with our clients that gives you the ability to paint more of a picture of different kinds of situations and what kinds of care you would want. What do you want? Visitors? Do you not want visitors? Do you want music? All kinds of different things about how you want to be cared for. I still encourage people, even if you use a document like that allows you to express more of your wishes, to go back after you've filled it out, after you've signed it, and make sure that it's legal. Number one, make sure that your loved ones have a copy of those medical directives so that they can use them if necessary.
Exactly.
But also sit down and have a conversation with your loved ones about why you filled it out the way that you filled it out. Because again, most of the scenarios that are in a little document like that are not exactly what's going to happen to you.
Right. And go ahead.
What you want to do is express your intent so that people can interpret your intent to whatever and apply that intent to whatever circumstance ends up coming up for you.
Well, and it's so important too, because we oftentimes have children that are flung all over the country who are dealing with parents who are trying to get this done. And everybody really does need to be on the same page. It doesn't matter what state they live in. They still need to be informed and kept in the loop.
Yeah, and that's a tricky thing.
It can be.
Because you
Absolutely.
can't have multiple people making the final decision about anything. So typically you're going to name one person who's the decision maker.
Right.
But then you have, let's say that you have 3 children who are spread out across the country. The other 2 who may not be named as the decision maker still want to have input.
Right.
And so that can get really tricky. Another reason to sit down with all 3 of your children or whoever your decision makers might be and express your wishes globally among all of them so that you can minimize the disharmony between them, even if there's one decision maker. And it happened in my family with my mom.
Did it?
Yes. So she had, I was her conservator and guardian,
Right.
appointed by the court to make all these decisions. And 20 years after she went into a nursing home, she lost the ability to swallow, which is not an unusual thing with Alzheimer's patients.
Not at all.
And so the usual route is when they lose the ability to swallow, they start aspirating their food.
Right. Feeding
and then,
tubes.
Exactly. So then they choke, and then they get pneumonia.
Mm-hmm.
And so typically cause of death, they say Alzheimer's is fatal. Cause of death is typically the pneumonia that comes from not being able to swallow correctly. So there came a point when the nursing home said, we're not going to feed your mom anymore. They were afraid of the liability because she was choking as they would try to feed her. So they said, you have a couple of choices. You can either give her a feeding tube and prolong her life, or you can let her die, starve to death. Great set of options.
I was going to say,
right?
it's like choosing between prison food and hospital food.
Exactly. So, and she had at this point been in a kind of vegetative state for about 10 years.
Wow.
I knew that she didn't want her life prolonged. I was very confident about that. But I had a younger brother who felt like not giving her a feeding tube and prolonging her life would be equivalent to murdering her.
Right.
And so we had to work through that. Even though I was the decision maker, I still saw my responsibility to be to preserve my mom's legacy and do what's in her best interest. And she cared also about what my little brother would want and how he would feel. And so that became a part of the decision-making process for me. He ended up changing his mind, and so we all got on the same page. But it's tricky stuff.
But it doesn't always happen that way. That's the thing.
It doesn't usually happen that way.
Oh, really? In your experience, it just doesn't happen that way very often?
People aren't able to put other people's interests before their own.
Wow. That's
People get stuck in their own position, and it divides the family.
I was going to say, it can fracture a family for good, can it?
Absolutely.
Wow.
It's happened in my own. I have a cousin here in town. It's happened in my cousin's family. It's happened in a lot of families.
Wow. Now what's your position, Catherine, on long-term care insurance?
I think long-term care insurance is the best way to pay for nursing home care. Unless you have plenty of money to pay, because it's close to $90,000 a year for a nursing home in Colorado right now.
Right, and that could be low end
Right.
in some situations.
Yeah. So that'll eat through your life savings really, really quickly. And so I'm a big believer in buying long-term care insurance, which will also get you the care that you deserve, the best care possible, instead of having to settle for whatever you can get that Medicaid will pay for.
Well, and once again, it can also stop family arguments before they start. I mean, whose responsibility is the loved one's care? I mean, all those kinds of things can be really stopped before they start if you just take a couple of simple steps.
Right. If you have money available through long-term care insurance to pay for care, then that alleviates a lot of the pressure on the family members. They'll also pay for a care manager. Having a geriatric care manager involved, at least as a consultant, is huge. Takes a ton of pressure off the family. Frees them up to just be there on an emotional level for their loved ones.
Yeah, and be there for a little support and TLC, as we used to say. So now, what about asset allocation once someone does pass away? Best to have it completely filled out, completely delineated in a will?
Yeah, best to have your big picture wishes about how you want whatever assets you happen to own when you die divided in paper.
Okay.
In writing, either in a will or in a living trust, one
Okay.
of the two. They work differently. But the point is to make sure that whatever you happen to own, so I don't recommend getting super specific because
Okay.
we don't know exactly what you're going to own when you die. Just taking it as a pot, for the most part, the pot of everything that I own when I die, these are the people who I want to receive that. So for most people, if they have children, most of it goes to their kids.
Right.
Hopefully you'll also consider some charities.
Sure.
Giving back to the community. I'm a big proponent of considering at least give 1% of your estate to a charitable cause, make a difference in the community. Like, what if everybody gave 1%?
That would be pretty
Change
amazing.
the world.
Sure.
Yeah. And your kids aren't going to miss 1%. Your
Right.
nieces and nephews aren't going to miss 1%. So big proponent of that. So you say in writing how you want everything divided, but the default doesn't have to be just handing it to everybody on the day that you die.
Okay.
There are ways to actually continue not just your financial legacy, but also your personal legacy in terms of your wisdom and your values in the lives of your loved ones.
So you can actually pass down your values
yes,
through your will and estate?
you can, yeah. And it doesn't happen most of the time because most of the time people walk into a lawyer's office and the lawyer says, okay, who do you want to get your stuff when you die? Lawyer puts that in writing and it's done. They get it when you die. They spend it before they've had a chance to think about it. And your personal legacy is gone.
Right. That makes perfect sense.
It's important to think through and ideally talk with your attorney about what your values are and the values that you want passed on. Do you want to promote education for your children and grandchildren? Do you want to make sure that they get a job, that they work hard, that they have to budget? I have two daughters who are 23 and 25, both married, both responsible. But I still wouldn't want them to get a big chunk of money when I die because me having to live on a budget when I was in my 20s and 30s.
Probably one of the best things that ever happened to you.
Absolutely. And it wasn't fun. And I didn't.
It never is.
Yeah, I didn't always do it well. But that's how I learned. And I want my children to have that same learning experience.
Yeah, it's not very responsible on our parts, if you think about it, just to hand them a big check at some point.
Right. Because then they don't have to worry about the budget. They can go out to eat all they want. They can go on, they can spend. They don't have to scrimp and save and want and wish like we did.
Right. Let's talk more about that on the other side. We'll take our final short break, 9:47 here. We're talking with Catherine Hammond of the Hammond Law Group. Catherine, how do people get a hold of you?
You can go to our website, which is coloradoestateplan.com, or
Okay.
call our office, which is 719-520-1474.
And we'll be sure and repeat that prior to the end of the show. Our remaining time with Catherine Hammond comes your way right after this here on KRDO. Stay here. Welcome back to the program. It's 9:51 here at KRDO News Radio. Our remaining time with Catherine Hammond of the Hammond Law Group right now here at KRDO News Radio on The Extra. Catherine, thanks again for the time. Listen, let's wrap up with talking about some of the things that you offer as services to folks out there when it comes to their estate planning.
Absolutely. So one of the primary ways that we try to serve the community is by providing education for the entire community, not just our clients. And so we do estate planning workshops that kind of go through the basics of wills and trusts and medical directives and all of that. People find them very, very helpful.
I'm sure.
We offer at least a few of those every single month. They happen to be coming up next week on Tuesday at 2 o'clock or 6:30, and then March 9th, and then Saturday, March 12th at 10 o'clock in the morning, we have another one.
Okay. Now, would you like people to pre-register for those?
We would love for people to pre-register for those. We'd love to have you there, and if you could just call our office or go to our website, coloradoestateplan.com, you can sign up for those, and we have some other tools online as well, an estate planning audit
Okay.
to help you figure out if maybe you need an estate plan or maybe you're okay, or if your estate plan might need to be updated.
I was going to ask you, how often should we do that? If we have an estate plan in place, how often should we revisit that, go back and maybe take a look and say, well, maybe this needs to be changed or everything's hunky-dory?
I am a big believer in going back and visiting with your attorney regularly.
Okay.
Most people never hear from their attorney after they sign their estate planning documents. But we ask all of our clients to come back in for a free checkup every single 3 years. There are certain triggers when you know you would need to update. If you get married or divorced, you have or adopt a child, your goals change, your financial situation changes, you become disabled, anything like that. But there are a lot of things that people don't realize could affect their estate plan that we pick up on when we have a chance to sit down with you for half an hour every few years. And one of the big things is a lot of people use living trust these days because
Right.
it keeps you out of the legal system.
That has become a big, big thing.
It has. And so if you use a trust, the whole key to it is making sure that all of your assets are owned by the trust. Most of the time when I sit down with folks who have existing living trusts that they've done somewhere else, they come into our office to have it reviewed, which we'll always do for free. First question I've learned to ask is, are all of your assets owned by the trust? Because probably 98% of the time or more, they're not. And so the trust doesn't actually work. So just having your lawyer ask you, now, do you have everything in your trust, is a trigger for people to make sure that it's properly funded, which makes it work the way you want it to work for your family.
Well, and how does one know the difference?
But the difference between
whether or not the trust is going to work or not. What's are there certain lingual things within the document that will tell you that?
Yeah, the difference between a trust that's going to work and not work comes down to two factors. One is, are the documents adequate from a legal perspective?
Okay.
And it's really hard for a layperson to know that.
Yes.
Check out your lawyer. Go to avvo.com, avvo.com. Check out your lawyer. And the other thing is, beyond the documents, whether you have implemented everything and maintained it so that it's still an accurate reflection of how to meet your goals based on whatever your current circumstances are.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Catherine, we are just about out of time. Before we run out of time completely, your next workshops are coming up when?
So we have workshops this coming week on Tuesday, March 9th and Saturday, March 12th. And then we also are doing a special panel expert discussion on April 12th at 2 o'clock in honor of National Healthcare Decision Day. The general public is invited to that. We'll be talking specifically about medical directives, incapacity, making sure that you get the care that you deserve, and maximizing your quality of life for the rest of your life, whether you are 40, whether you're 80.
And one more time, how can people get a hold of you?
They can call us at 719-520-1474 or go to our website, coloradoestateplan.com.
Catherine, delight to see you as always. I appreciate the time, and I certainly appreciate everything you teach me every time you come in and see us.
Thanks so much.
You bet. We'll do it again soon. Catherine Hammond, the Hammond Law Group here on KRDO News Radio. That does it for another edition of The Extra here on KRDO News Radio. We look forward to talking to you again next week. The troubleshooter, Tom Martino, on the way next here on KRDO. A lot to do coming up next week. Of course, on Monday, we'll be talking to our friends from the Better Business Bureau. Jonathan Liebert will be here to discuss what else but scams. And you know, with tax season being in full swing, we're going to have a lot to talk about. Be sure to be with us here on KRDO News Radio.